Hello and welcome. I'm Allison, and today we're going to talk about harnessing the power and knowledge of the three reflexes found in the body. I think sometimes when we're thinking about reflexes, one of the first thoughts we have is the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So these four reflexes or trauma responses in the body. Now, it's not exactly what I'm going to be talking about today, but I will let you know kind of how they interweave with what I'm talking about. What I am talking about today is the three reflexes that we are working with in gentle somatic yoga and in Hannah Somatics. And once we talk about them today, you will probably be able to recognize them not only in yourself, but anytime you're going out, you're going to start to see these patterns. And it's real important to identify because it also illuminates why we are working with repatterning our body through gentle somatic yoga. So I'm going to demonstrate the first reflex. In Hannah Somatics, we consider this, or it's called the red light reflex. The red light reflex, if you think of this reflex as sort of the stop reflex, it looks a little like this. And you can see there's a bit of a forward bracing, and sometimes the arms aren't quite braced this much. Sometimes they're down by the side, but the way you can recognize a red light reflex is that the front becomes shortened, the body might be a little crouched, and the forearms and the arms are armored a little bit. And the red light reflex or stop reflex can happen for many reasons. It doesn't even really matter how it comes about, but here are some reasons why it might. So if you're used to driving or typing a lot, or a lot of your day is forward focused, and you can see this in sometimes, not always, but in elderly folks, there is this sort of tendency to go forward in space and kind of crouch and hunch. This shortens things on the front side of the body. And there's a reason it's also called stop reflex. The more I've studied it, the more I've also realized that people who are kind of stuck in a red light reflex also tend to be, but not always, kind of ground-oriented people. So if something surprising would happen, these would be the people that would brace and kind of ground themselves down to the ground. And you have this whole layer of tension and information that comes up through the body from that red light reflex. So the other reflex that it's somewhat the opposite of red light reflex, and we'll call that green light reflex, and I'll show this to the side, is sort of like our ready to go posture. And this is a body posture. It can look tight and narrow, the back line of the body being very tight. Buttocks, back, hamstring. This reflex is a reflex where people get stuck in this idea of being ready to go or called to action. This reflex can come about through training. So you think of, I think of maybe a dancer, a singer, a gymnast, somebody in the military, people who have been told to stand up straight, or folks that just generally have in life that predisposition that when things get stressful, they are ready to go. And between these two, when we're given this sort of stress response, I tend to kind of study the green light reflex as people who are a little bit more sky oriented. So if you've worked with me or you've been through Rolfing, that refers to our people that are maybe more apt to be related to the sky or up above them, holding themselves up rather than kind of bracing down to the ground. And I think people can have both of these tendencies, but often we will see in an unworked on body, we will see these reflex patterns almost as permanent functional patterns. And you can see it in many places you go. The third reflex I'm going to talk about is called the trauma reflex. And I'm going to demonstrate from the front, and this one's a little bit more challenging for me to demonstrate, but I'll talk about it, is a little bit of a shortening on one side and maybe a hitching up of a shoulder. So you can see how the sides are incongruent. And in this way, trauma reflex mirrors what someone might see in extreme cases in scoliosis, but it doesn't have to be that big. So a trauma reflex can happen, for example, if I would have a surgery or an impact to the hip, and I might be holding it in even slightly, and it's going to torque the rest of the body in a kind of different pattern. The reason why this is all so timely is because under stress, whether that be mental or physical, our bodies will have a tendency to fall into one of our easy and reflexive patterns, whether we hold in or go in our green light reflex, or we sort of twist out of the situation because we're uncomfortable. And mental stress, psychological stress, all these stressors will bring some of us into our basic reflexive patterns. Once we know this in ourselves and we know how to get out of it, we can easily bring ourselves back into balance and harmony in even the most stress and hard situations. The last thing I'll say on this, if you're familiar with fight or flight, it sort of falls into, I think, a red light reflex. Let me back that up. I believe that the freeze is more of a red light. So you think of red light reflex, bearing down and pausing. You got to freeze right there. And then you think of fight or flight as sort of a gearing up or like getting ready. So I'm still studying those reactions and how they relate with fight, flight, or freeze. But it's a good thing to study and ask in yourself, where do you find yourself in times of stress, mental and otherwise, where do you find your body landing? And it is true, once we do find and harness the power of that knowledge of the three reflexes, we are much more able to come out of that and come back into more harmony in ourselves.